I knew something was changing in my marriage the moment another woman started making my husband seem lighter again. Not happier exactly, just easier, less exhausted. That night, I burned dinner while David stood beside the kitchen counter answering her messages. Without even noticing the smoke filling our apartment, the smoke alarm screamed overhead as I pulled the pan off the stove too late. Blackened pasta sauce clung to the bottom while rain pressed softly against the windows outside. Headlights moved across the apartment walls in slow flashes. David looked up from his phone and immediately crossed the kitchen to open the windows. "Jesus, Lily?" I coughed out a laugh while carrying the ruined pan toward the sink, and for a second the moment almost felt familiar. The apartment felt warm again, like the version of us that existed before work schedules and constant exhaustion started shaping every evening. Then David's phone buzzed again. He checked the screen automatically while loosening his tie, and a small smile crossed his face before disappearing. That tiny expression bothered me more than it should have. "Work?" I asked casually. "Hazel fixed the hotel layouts," he said distractedly while typing back. "The clients changed everything again." Her name had slowly entered our lives without either of us noticing. At first, Hazel was simply someone from David's design studio. Then gradually she became part of daily conversations. Funny stories from meetings, late-night project disasters, messages during dinner. Her name started sounding strangely normal inside our apartment. David talked about her the way tired people talk about someone who makes difficult days easier. I hated how much I noticed that. He carried his laptop toward the dining table while I cleaned the kitchen quietly. Deep down, I knew Hazel herself was not the real problem. What unsettled me was the feeling that somebody else was receiving the lighter version of my husband while I got whatever remained. After his energy disappeared, before marriage, David noticed everything about me. He noticed new perfume immediately. He noticed when stress changed my mood before I even spoke. Sometimes he crossed the city just to bring coffee to the bakery because he knew I forgot to eat during busy shifts. Back then, loving each other felt natural. Now, entire evenings disappeared into separate screens and unfinished conversations. That kind of distance happens slowly in long relationships. Nobody wakes up emotionally disconnected overnight. It grows through postponed dinners, distracted listening, and constantly assuming there will be more time later. David finally looked up from his laptop. "You didn't have to cook tonight." For a moment, I almost answered honestly. I almost admitted that I missed him even while living beside him every day. Instead, I rinsed the pan and forced a small smile. He looked like he wanted to continue the conversation, but his phone buzzed again before either of us spoke. Later that night, David fell asleep on the couch, with work still open across his laptop screen. The television played quietly in the background while rain continued outside. I sat across from him, pretending to organize bakery invoices, but most of the time I simply watched him sleep. He looked exhausted in a way I had stopped noticing before. Shadows rested beneath his eyes, and tension still showed in his shoulders even while sleeping. Coffee stained the sleeve of his shirt because lately he rushed through every part of his life, and suddenly I realized something uncomfortable. At some point I had stopped looking carefully at my own husband. And maybe he had stopped looking carefully at me too. The following Friday, I brought coffee to David's studio during lunch. I had not visited in months, and the receptionist smiled warmly when she saw me. She mentioned everyone was inside the conference room preparing for a presentation. Before I reached the hallway, I heard laughter. Not polite office laughter, real laughter, The kind people share when they temporarily forget stress exists. I slowed down instinctively. David stood near the projector screen holding fabric samples while Hazel sat cross-legged on the conference table, surrounded by color palettes and papers. She laughed at something he said, then reached over absent-mindedly and straightened his crooked tie. The movement lasted only a second or two, but my stomach tightened immediately. Then David noticed me standing there. Lily! His expression changed at once. Hazel stood quickly after turning toward me, and now that I finally saw her properly, I understood why people felt comfortable around her so easily. She was beautiful without looking intimidating. Dark hair rested loosely over one shoulder, and her calm expression made her seem naturally approachable. "Your timing is perfect," she said warmly, after noticing the coffee tray in my hands. David forgot to eat again. What unsettled me most was how sincere she sounded. She did not seem fake or manipulative. If anything, she seemed genuinely thoughtful, and somehow that made the entire situation feel worse. While everyone gathered around the coffee cups, I watched David carefully. He looked lighter in that room than he had looked at home in weeks, not because he loved Hazel, because around her he still seemed emotionally awake. That realization stayed with me the entire drive home. Not every marriage falls apart because of betrayal. Sometimes the real danger begins much earlier, when somebody else starts receiving the attention, patience, and emotional energy your relationship quietly stopped getting. That night, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror removing makeup while the shower ran downstairs. I did not look unattractive or old. I simply looked disconnected from myself, like someone surviving life instead of fully living it. Most days, my hair stayed tied back because bakery work exhausted me. My clothes smelled like flour and sugar by evening, and I could not remember the last time I dressed beautifully for no reason other than wanting to feel good inside my own skin. Somewhere between stress, survival, and routine, I had quietly disappeared from my own life. Then I remembered Hazel fixing David's tie without hesitation. And for the first time since our marriage started changing, I felt something worse than jealousy. I felt replaceable. Before I share the rest of the story, I need to know, where are you listening from? I would love to hear from you. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise and found David already gone. His side of the bed was cold. A half-finished cup of coffee sat near the sink beside a folded note written on bakery paper. "Early meeting. Don't forget to eat today." I stared at the note longer than necessary. David still cared. That was obvious. But lately, our marriage felt like two exhausted people trying to love each other through routines instead of connection. At the bakery, the morning rush started before I fully woke up. Orders piled across the counter while espresso machines hissed nonstop behind me. Usually, work distracted me from personal problems. This time, it only made me think harder. Every customer seemed connected to someone. One man bought cinnamon rolls every Friday for his wife because she hated cooking before work. An older woman came in holding flowers while talking happily about her anniversary dinner later that evening. Small things, normal things. Still, something about them stayed with me all day. Love rarely disappears dramatically. Most relationships weaken through neglect. People barely notice while it's happening. Affection gets postponed. Conversations become shorter. Attention slowly moves somewhere else. And eventually, two people stop feeling emotionally close, even while sharing the same home. That evening, I reached the apartment early for once. The silence inside felt strange. No television, no music, no smell of food, just cold air and untouched furniture. I opened the refrigerator and stared for a moment. Takeout containers, energy drinks, half-empty coffee bottles. Our home looked like a place people passed through instead of lived in. Without thinking too much about it, I tied my hair properly, changed clothes, and started cooking. Not because dinner mattered, because I wanted something inside the apartment to feel alive again. By the time David came home, candles glowed softly near the dining table, and music played quietly from the kitchen speaker. He stopped near the doorway after taking his coat off. For a second, he simply looked around. "You made all this?" I smiled slightly. "We used to eat dinner together sometimes. Remember?" A tired laugh escaped him before he walked closer. "Barely. Dinner felt awkward in the beginning. We kept falling into safe conversations about work because that was easier than talking honestly. Then gradually something shifted. David started describing problems with one of his clients, and instead of half listening while checking emails, I paid attention fully. I noticed details I would have ignored before. The frustration in his voice, the pressure he carried quietly, the way he rubbed his forehead whenever he felt overwhelmed. People feel closest to those who make them feel heard. That emotional attention matters more than most couples realize. Without it, relationships start becoming logistical instead of intimate. Halfway through dinner, David leaned back slightly and looked at me carefully. "You seem different tonight. Is that bad?" "No." His voice softened. "It feels nice." That sentence affected me more than it should have. Because one peaceful dinner should not feel unusual inside a marriage. After eating, we cleaned the kitchen together for the first time in months. At one point, our hands touched while reaching for the same plate, and both of us paused awkwardly for half a second, like strangers, remembering old habits. Later that night, David fell asleep beside me almost immediately. I stayed awake longer, staring at the ceiling. Then I quietly picked up his phone from the nightstand. I hated myself a little for doing it, but insecurity makes people search for reassurance in unhealthy ways. There was nothing inappropriate inside his messages with Hazel, mostly project discussions, deadlines, design revisions. Then I found one message from earlier that week. "Hazel, did you ever eat dinner tonight, or are you surviving on coffee again?" "David, depends. Does coffee count as a personality now?" "Hazel, honestly, at this point, yes." I stared at the screen silently. The conversation was harmless. That somehow made it hurt more. Because the problem was not cheating. It was emotional familiarity. Hazel noticed things about David's daily life that I had stopped noticing myself. The following Friday, Hazel invited both of us to a small birthday dinner downtown. My first instinct was refusing immediately. But when David asked if I wanted to come, something in his expression stopped me. Hope, actual hope. So I said yes. The restaurant sat above the city on a rooftop covered in golden lights and hanging plants. Soft jazz played somewhere near the bar, while groups of people laughed over drinks and desserts. Hazel moved naturally through the crowd, greeting everyone warmly. Watching her felt strange because I slowly understood something uncomfortable. She made people feel important, not through flirting, through attention. When someone spoke, Hazel listened fully. She remembered details. She asked thoughtful questions. Nothing about her felt forced. At one point, she touched my arm gently while introducing me to her friends. "Lily owns the bakery I told you about," she said warmly. "Her strawberry cakes are honestly life-changing." I smiled politely, but inside I felt embarrassed. Hazel remembered small details about my life after meeting me twice. Meanwhile, I could barely remember the last meaningful thing David told me without distraction. Later that evening, David stepped outside to answer a client call. Hazel stood beside me near the balcony overlooking the city. ice-cold wind moved softly through her hair, while traffic lights glowed far below us. "You and David seem good together," she said quietly. I looked at her carefully then. There was no hidden meaning behind the comment. No manipulation, just honesty. "We've both been busy lately," I admitted. Hazel nodded slowly before looking back toward the skyline. "Busy people forget relationships need maintenance too." Simple sentence, but it stayed with me the entire drive home. And somewhere between the rooftop lights, the cold air, and David reaching for my hand during the ride back, I realized something painful. Hazel was not taking my husband away from me. Life already had been. December turned the city quieter. Snow covered the sidewalks outside the bakery, and every evening the windows fogged from the heat inside. Customers rushed in wearing heavy coats while holiday music played softly near the counter. Most days became long and exhausting again, but something at home no longer felt as cold as before. David started waiting for me after closing. Sometimes he arrived with coffee and stood beside the kitchen counter while I finished decorating cakes. Other nights he helped carry supply boxes into storage without me asking. The changes between us were small, almost invisible from the outside, but they mattered. One snowy evening, the bakery stayed open later than usual because a large holiday order went wrong at the last minute. By the time I locked the front door, my shoulders hurt and flour covered half my sweater. David waited across the street beside his car, with snow resting on his dark coat. The sight of him standing there made something soften inside me immediately. Not excitement, not relief. Something quieter. Like home finally beginning to feel familiar again. During the drive back, soft music played while snow moved across the windshield. David rested one hand near the center console, and after a moment, I placed my hand over his without thinking about it. Months ago, even simple touches between us had started disappearing. That was the frightening part about emotional distance. People rarely notice it while it's happening. Affection fades gradually through postponed conversations, distractions, and routine exhaustion, until closeness starts feeling unfamiliar. When we reached the apartment, David reheated soup while I changed clothes upstairs. The apartment smelled warm again lately. Bread, coffee, candles. Lived in. For a long time, our home had felt temporary, like two overworked people sleeping in the same place between responsibilities. Now, it slowly felt personal again. While setting bowls onto the table, David looked at me carefully. "You've been smiling more lately," he said. I laughed quietly. "So have you." And it was true. Not because our problems disappeared overnight. We still worked too much. We still had stressful days. But we stopped treating each other like background noise inside our own lives. That changed everything. People often believe relationships survive through big romantic gestures. Most strong marriages actually survive through ordinary attention, listening properly, looking away from screens, remembering details, protecting small moments before life slowly replaces them with routine. After dinner, David helped me clean the kitchen before disappearing upstairs for a few minutes. When he returned, he carried an old cardboard box in his hands. I frowned slightly. "What's that?" "Found it in the closet." He placed the box onto the coffee table and opened it carefully. Inside were old photographs, movie tickets, bakery receipts, handwritten notes, and
random pieces of our early years together.
The first apartment, weekend trips, burned dinners we laughed through because we had no idea how to cook back then. I picked up one photo slowly. David stood beside me in that picture wearing paint-covered clothes while helping renovate the bakery before opening day. We looked exhausted, broke, and unbelievably happy. "I forgot about this," I said softly. David sat beside me on the couch. I think we forgot about a lot of things. Neither of us spoke for a moment after that. Outside, snow continued falling beyond the windows, while jazz music played quietly in the background. The apartment lights reflected softly across the living room, and suddenly the silence between us no longer felt empty. Then David looked at me seriously. "I need to tell you something." A nervous feeling moved through me instantly, but his voice stayed calm. "The night you came to the studio with coffee," he paused briefly, "I realized how distant we'd become. I looked down at the photograph in my hands. I realized it too." David leaned back against the couch slowly. "I liked talking to Hazel because everything felt easy around her. No stress, no tension." He looked at me carefully before continuing, "But I never wanted another life, Lily. I wanted ours back." Something inside my chest tightened after hearing that, not because the words were dramatic, because they were honest. And honesty usually sounds simpler than people expect. I rested my head against his shoulder while snow continued falling outside. Hazel was never really the story. She simply exposed the quiet loneliness already living inside our marriage, long before either of us admitted it. Some couples lose each other through betrayal. Others lose each other through neglect so gradual they barely notice it happening. We came dangerously close to becoming the second kind. But somewhere between burnt dinners, long silences, tired apologies, and small efforts to reconnect, we finally stopped acting like strangers sharing the same apartment. David wrapped his arm around me gently while the old photographs remained scattered across the table between us. No phones, no work, no emotional distance, filling every quiet moment, just two people finally paying attention again. And for the first time in a long while, that felt like enough. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more emotional English stories. And remember, sometimes relationships don't need perfect people. They only need two people willing to notice each other again.